The woman crumpled to the cold stone floor of the throne hall like a marionette with cut strings, her medical bag spilling vials across the marble, and Octavian Theron, Vampire King of the Northern Courts, raised one pale hand to silence the immediate rush of courtiers who moved to wake her. "No one touches her," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries of absolute authority. "Let her rest." The command froze every vampire in the cavernous hall. They stood like statues, white-haired and alabaster-skinned, dressed in the formal blacks and deep crimsons of court attire, their ancient eyes watching their king with barely concealed shock. Octavian Theron never showed mercy, never paused for weakness, yet here he stood, descending from his obsidian throne with movements too fluid to be human, crossing the polished floor to kneel beside the fallen woman. She was small, he realized, human small, fragile in a way his kind had forgotten existed. Her dark auburn hair had escaped its practical bun, spreading across the stone like spilled wine. Even unconscious, exhaustion marked her features' shadows beneath closed eyes, a pallor that suggested she hadn't eaten properly in days, the tremor in her hands that spoke of pushed limits and ignored needs. "Your Majesty," Counselor Bastian ventured from the edge of the dais, his silver eyes uncertain. "The physician has been working for 72 hours without rest. Perhaps we should—" "You will do nothing," Octavian interrupted, not looking up from the woman. "Bring blankets, pillows, food for when she wakes, and someone find out when she last ate." The courtiers scattered with vampiric speed, their footsteps silent on stone. Octavian remained kneeling, studying the human who had achieved what no one else could. She had his full attention. Her name was Rivera, and she'd arrived 5 days ago in response to a carefully worded summons. A physician with a specialty in blood disorders and mysterious ailments, she'd been told she was consulting for an extremely private family with a genetic condition. The truth that she'd been brought to the hidden vampire court beneath the city to diagnose an illness that was slowly killing immortals had been revealed only after she'd signed contracts thick with non-disclosure clauses and magical bindings. She hadn't run, hadn't screamed. She'd stared at Octavian with those sharp hazel eyes, set down her medical bag, and asked to examine the first patient. That had been 5 days ago. She'd barely left the medical wing since, working with a focus that bordered on obsession, drawing blood, running tests on equipment they'd acquired specifically for her use, filling notebooks with observations in handwriting that grew progressively shakier as exhaustion set in. Counselor Marin returned with an armful of silk blankets, her white hair bound in elaborate braids that denoted her status as the court's historian. "Your Majesty, the kitchen staff reports that Dr. Rivera refused meals for the past 2 days. She said she didn't have time." Something dangerous flickered in Octavian's chest. He took the blankets without comment, arranging them over Rebecca's unconscious form with a care that would have shocked anyone who knew his reputation. The Vampire King was not known for gentleness. He was known for swift justice, strategic brilliance, and an absolute refusal to show weakness of any kind. Yet here he was, tucking blankets around a human woman who'd collapsed from exhaustion in his throne hall. "Clear the hall," he said. "I'll remain with her until she wakes. Your Majesty, you have the tribunal with the southern courts in 1 hour. Postpone it." "But—" Octavian finally looked up, and his eyes, normally the pale blue of winter ice, had darkened to something colder, more absolute. "I will not repeat myself, Counselor Bastian." The hall emptied in seconds. Silence settled over the throne room, broken only by Rebecca's quiet breathing. Octavian sat back against the base of his throne, a position he'd never occupied before, and watched the rise and fall of her chest beneath the blankets. Something about her presence had unsettled him from the moment she'd arrived. Not fear, he'd conquered that emotion centuries ago, but a kind of heightened awareness, as if the air itself changed when she entered a room. She'd stood before him in that first meeting, her posture straight despite obvious nervousness, and asked him direct questions about vampire physiology that no human should have been brave enough to voice. When he'd answered with clinical precision, she'd nodded once and launched into her requirements: full access to patients, complete honesty about symptoms, and no interference in her diagnostic process. He'd agreed to all of it. Then he'd assigned 2 guards to follow her at a distance, not to control her movements but to ensure she didn't collapse from overwork. Apparently, his guards had failed that particular duty. Octavian reached out, almost without thinking, and brushed a strand of auburn hair from Rebecca's face. Her skin was warm beneath his fingertips almost feverishly, so compared to his own cold flesh. Humans always felt like living furnaces to vampires, but she seemed to burn brighter than most, as if some internal fire drove her forward even when her body begged for rest. "Stubborn," he murmured, "dangerously stubborn." An hour passed, then 2. Servants brought food as ordered: warm soup, fresh bread, fruit that had been imported at ruinous expense because the vampire court rarely kept human provisions stocked. Octavian ignored the tribunal delegates who appeared at the hall's entrance, then retreated at a single glance from their king. He ignored the stack of documents that Counselor Marin tentatively placed on the throne steps. He ignored everything except the woman sleeping on his throne room floor. The court would be gossiping already. The servants would spread word that their king had canceled audiences to sit vigil over a human physician. By nightfall, every vampire in the northern courts would know that Octavian Theron had shown favoritism, shown care, shown something dangerously close to tenderness. He found he didn't care. Rebecca stirred as the 3rd hour approached. Her breathing changed first, quickening slightly, and then her fingers twitched beneath the blankets. Octavian leaned forward, watching as her eyes moved beneath closed lids, consciousness returning in stages. "Easy," he said quietly when her eyes finally opened, confusion flooding those hazel depths. "You're safe." She blinked at him, processing. Then her gaze sharpened and she tried to sit up too quickly, swaying. Octavian caught her shoulders, steadying her with hands that remained carefully gentle. "What?" Her voice came out rough. She cleared her throat. "What happened?" "You fainted," Octavian said. "In the middle of presenting your preliminary findings to the court. You collapsed before finishing your second sentence." Mortification flooded her expression. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry, Your Majesty. I didn't mean I should have." "When did you last eat, Dr. Rivera?" The question clearly caught her off guard. Breakfast yesterday, I think. Maybe?" "Yesterday." Octavian kept his voice level through sheer force of will, though something dark and possessive was unfurling in his chest. "You've been working for 5 days on food and sleep that wouldn't sustain a child. I was busy. You were reckless." He released her shoulders, reaching instead for the tray of food the servants had prepared. "Eat, now." Rebecca stared at the soup he thrust toward her, then at him, then back at the soup. "Did you just order me to eat?" "I am a king. Dr. Rivera, I give orders. You will follow this one." For a moment he thought she might argue that stubborn fire flickering in her eyes, but then her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. A flush crept up her neck as she accepted the soup bowl. "This is humiliating," she muttered, but she was already bringing the spoon to her lips. The first taste made her eyes close in obvious relief. Octavian watched her eat with an intensity that would have alarmed him if he'd been capable of self-reflection in that moment. Something about seeing her nourish herself, seeing color return to her cheeks and steadiness to her hands, satisfied a need he hadn't known existed. "Your Majesty," Rebecca said between careful spoonfuls, "I really am sorry. I had important findings to present. The pattern of illness in your court isn't random, there's a clear progression, and I think I've isolated the cause. But I need to run more tests to be certain. The findings can wait until you're recovered." "But, Dr. Rivera," he pitched his voice to the tone that made century-old vampires fall silent. "You are no use to this court dead from exhaustion. You will eat, you will sleep, then and only then will you return to work. Are we understood?" She met his eyes over the soup bowl, and something electric passed between them. He saw the moment she recognized the concern beneath his authority, saw her expression shift from irritation to uncertainty to something softer. "Understood," she said quietly. They sat in silence while she finished the soup, then the bread, then started on the fruit with an appetite that suggested she'd been half-starved for days. Octavian found himself cataloging details he shouldn't care about: the way she ate with quick, efficient movements, the slight tremor that gradually left her hands as food settled her blood sugar, The occasional glance she cast his way, as if confirming he was real and not some exhaustion-induced hallucination. "Why did you stop everyone from waking me?" Rebecca asked suddenly. Octavian considered his answer carefully. Truth was a weapon in vampire politics, something to be deployed with precision. But looking at this human woman who'd fainted on his throne room floor, he found he wanted to offer her honesty. "Because you needed rest more than we needed your report," he said. "Because I refused to let someone who came here to help us destroy herself in the process." He paused. "Because no one should be that exhausted, Dr. Rivera. Not even for us." She studied him with an expression that made him feel unexpectedly exposed. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. More monstrous, maybe? The contracts I signed made it very clear that I was entering the domain of creatures who could kill me without effort. But you've been—" She trailed off, searching for words. "Kind. In your way." "Don't mistake pragmatism for kindness," Octavian said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "You're valuable to this court. I protect valuable assets. Is that what I am? An asset?" The question hung between them, weighted with something neither seemed ready to name. Before Octavian could formulate a response, the throne room doors opened, and Counselor Bastian entered with obvious reluctance. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but the situation has grown urgent. Lord Ambrose collapsed an hour ago. He's the 7th this week." Octavian was on his feet instantly, though he kept one hand extended toward Rebecca in silent command to stay seated. "His condition? Deteriorating rapidly. The healers say, if the pattern holds, he has perhaps 2 days before death. True death, not the suspended animation that vampires could recover from. Whatever was killing his court was claiming victims faster." Rebecca stood despite his gesture, swaying only slightly. "I need to see him, now." "You need rest. Your Majesty, with respect, you brought me here to solve this." Her voice carried steel beneath the exhaustion. 7 victims in 5 days means the progression is accelerating. If I wait until I'm fully rested, you might lose Lord Ambrose and whoever else falls ill in the next 12 hours. She met his gaze directly. "So, unless you plan to lock me in a bedroom, which I don't recommend given that I'm the only one who can help, I suggest we go to the medical wing immediately." Octavian felt his lips curve into something that might have been a genuine expression of approval. "You have courage, Dr. Rivera. Foolish courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. I'll sleep when your courtiers aren't dying." He studied her for a long moment, weighing options with the strategic mind that had kept him in power for 3 centuries. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Very well. But you'll eat while you work, and you'll sit whenever possible. And if you show signs of collapse again, I will personally carry you to a bed and post guards at the door." "That seems excessive." "That is the price of my cooperation." Rebecca's expression suggested she was biting back several retorts, but she finally nodded. "Deal." Octavian gestured toward the throne room doors, then fell into step beside her as they walked. His presence, he knew, would clear their path more efficiently than any verbal command. The court would see their king walking with the human physician, would note the careful way he moderated his naturally faster pace to match hers, would observe the protective angle of his body as they moved through corridors. Let them see, let them talk. The medical wing occupied the eastern section of the underground court, a series of rooms that had been updated with modern equipment specifically for Rebecca's use. The scent of antiseptic mingled with the older smell of stone and earth. Rebecca headed straight for the isolation chamber where Lord Ambrose had been taken, scrubbing her hands and donning gloves with practiced efficiency. Lord Ambrose looked terrible. His white hair had lost its luster, his alabaster skin had taken on a grayish tinge, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. He was old even by vampire standards, nearly 500 years, and whatever illness ravaged him seemed to accelerate with age. Rebecca began her examination with brisk competence, checking vital signs that Octavian wouldn't have thought applicable to vampires. She drew blood samples, made notes, asked questions about recent activities that Ambrose answered in a voice barely above a whisper. "The pain started in your extremities?" Rebecca asked, gentle but focused. Yes, Ambrose managed. Fingers first, spreading inward. She nodded, making another note. Then she looked up at Octavian, who'd positioned himself near the door in a location that let him watch both Rebecca and the patient simultaneously. I need access to the blood stores, she said. All the sources your court uses, going back 3 months. You think the blood is contaminated? I think the pattern suggests something introduced to your system externally, and blood is the most obvious vector. She stripped off her gloves, disposing of them with crisp movements. I initially assumed it might be viral or bacterial, but nothing I've tested has shown the typical markers. This looks almost like poisoning, but with a delayed mechanism I've never seen before. Poison. The word settled over Octavian like frost. Poisoning meant intent, meant someone in his court was targeting his people deliberately. You'll have everything you need, he said. Bastian, arrange immediate access to all blood stores and procurement records. I want to know where every drop came from and who handled it. The counselor, who'd followed them to the medical wing, bowed and departed with vampiric speed. Rebecca turned back to Lord Ambrose, checking the monitors one more time. We'll figure this out, she told him with quiet conviction. I promise. Ambrose managed a weak imitation of his usual charming expression. I believe you, Dr. Rivera. The king chose well. Something in the way he said it made Rebecca glance at Octavian, a question in her eyes that he didn't answer. They worked through the night, or what passed for night, in the underground court that operated on reversed schedules. Rebecca examined blood samples under microscopes, ran spectral analyses on equipment that had cost Octavian's court a fortune, filled pages of her notebook with chemical formulas and observations. Octavian stayed with her the entire time, ignoring increasingly urgent messages from his counselors about missed meetings and postponed tribunals. He told himself it was strategic necessity. Rebecca was their only hope of solving this crisis. Therefore, ensuring her success took priority over bureaucratic concerns. But strategy didn't explain why he noticed the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, didn't explain why he found himself timing her water breaks and ensuring fresh coffee appeared at regular intervals. Didn't explain the surge of satisfaction he felt when she ate the sandwich he'd ordered without even looking up from her microscope. Found you, Rebecca breathed suddenly, straightening from the equipment. Triumph lit her exhausted features. Your Majesty, look at this. Octavian crossed the laboratory in 2 strides, leaning over her shoulder to view the monitor. She pulled up images side by side, blood samples magnified to cellular level. This is normal vampire blood from a healthy courier, she explained, pointing to the left image. Notice the cell structure, the unique way the red blood cells cluster. Now look at Lord Ambrose's blood. She indicated the right image. See these irregularities, these crystalline formations growing inside the cells? Octavian saw them, tiny structures that looked like shards of dark glass embedded in the blood cells. What are they? A compound I've never encountered before, but the structure suggests something designed specifically to interact with vampire physiology. Her voice quickened with the rush of discovery. It's genius, actually, in a horrifying way. The compound is inert in human blood, wouldn't affect a human host at all. But in vampire blood it activates, crystallizing over a period of weeks. The crystals disrupt cellular function, essentially poisoning you from the inside out. Can it be treated? I think so. The compound is blood-soluble, which means we can potentially flush it out through blood transfusion with clean sources. It'll take multiple treatments, and the patient will be weak during recovery. But she met his eyes, and her exhaustion couldn't hide the fierce intelligence burning there. I can save them, Your Majesty, all of them. Relief hit Octavian with unexpected force. He realized he'd been carrying tension he hadn't acknowledged, a fear that he might lose members of his court to this mysterious illness. Lose people he'd known for decades, centuries in some cases. People who were his responsibility to protect. Begin treatment protocols immediately, he said. Whatever resources you need, already mentally drafting the list. Rebecca was writing again, her hand flying across the page. But there's a bigger problem, Your Majesty. This compound? It didn't occur naturally. Someone created it, someone with extensive knowledge of vampire physiology and access to your blood supply. Her words confirmed what Octavian had already concluded. Someone in my court. or someone with connections inside your court? She looked up at him, and concern shadowed her features. Whoever did this is smart and patient. They've been introducing this compound slowly enough that symptoms didn't appear for weeks, making it nearly impossible to trace the source. That level of premeditation suggests a coup, Octavian finished. Someone trying to weaken the court's strongest members before making a move for power. Rebecca nodded slowly. I'll need to test all the blood stores, systematically. Whatever's contaminated needs to be identified and destroyed. I'll have everything brought to the laboratory. And Your Majesty? She hesitated, then pushed forward. You should consider that whoever did this might not be happy about being discovered. I'm going to be very obvious about what I'm looking for. That makes me a target, Octavian said flatly. The possessive protectiveness he'd been fighting since Rebecca collapsed on his throne room floor solidified into something absolute. Which is why, from this moment forward, you don't go anywhere without guards. My personal guards, not court guards. People I trust absolutely. That seems non-negotiable, Dr. Rivera. He let his voice drop to the tone that brooked no argument. You've just become the most dangerous person in this court to whoever orchestrated this attack. I will not allow you to become a casualty of vampire politics. She studied him with that unnervingly direct gaze. You're different when you're worried. I'm not worried, I'm practical. Right, practical. But something in her expression suggested she saw through the deflection. A knock at the laboratory door interrupted the moment. Counselor Marin entered, her arms full of old leather-bound ledgers. The blood procurement records, Your Majesty. Going back 6 months as requested. Rebecca accepted the ledgers with thanks, already flipping through pages. Octavian watched her work, noting the renewed energy in her movements now that she had a concrete path forward. The breakthrough had revitalized her more than food or rest could have. Your Majesty, Marin said quietly, positioning herself so Rebecca couldn't overhear. The court is asking questions about your attention to the human physician. Let them ask. Some are suggesting that your judgment may be compromised, that perhaps you're too invested in Counselor Marin. Octavian turned the full weight of his attention on her, and she actually took a step back. I am invested in solving a conspiracy that is killing my people. Dr. Rivera is the key to that solution. My attention to her well-being is therefore entirely logical. If anyone in this court has concerns about my judgment, they may voice them directly. To me. Alone. The counselor paled even further than normal. Of course, Your Majesty. I merely thought you should be aware. I am aware. I simply don't care. Marin retreated quickly, and Octavian turned back to find Rebecca watching him with raised eyebrows. Trouble in paradise? She asked. Nothing I can't handle. They're worried about you spending time with me. It wasn't a question. Octavian could have deflected, should have deflected. Instead, he found himself being honest again, a habit that was becoming dangerously frequent around this woman. Some members of the court believe human emotions are weakness. They think that showing concern for your welfare suggests I'm compromised. Are you? The question hung between them, impossible to answer and impossible to ignore. Octavian looked at Rebecca, really looked at her, cataloging everything he'd been trying not to acknowledge. The way his dead heart seemed to beat in her presence. The fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the stubborn, brilliant woman who'd collapsed from exhaustion trying to save his people. The fact that he'd canceled tribunals and ignored political obligations just to sit vigil while she slept. I don't know, he admitted finally. But it doesn't matter. You're under my protection now, Dr. Rivera. Anyone who wants to harm you will have to go through me first. Rebecca held his gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then she nodded once and turned back to the ledgers. Well then, let's make sure I'm worth protecting. Help me cross-reference these procurement records with the patient timeline. They worked through the records together, Rebecca calling out dates and sources while Octavian matched them against the list of when various courtiers had fallen ill. A pattern emerged slowly, built from disparate pieces of information that coalesced into damning evidence. "There," Rebecca said, stabbing her finger at an entry. "Every patient consumed blood from this supplier in the 3 weeks before showing symptoms. Supplier number 47 listed as Gods. Do you have 47 different blood sources?" "We have over 300, Octavian said absently, studying the entry. Supplier 47 is managed by the court's alchemist, Thaddeus Locke. He oversees specialized preparations, medicinal blends, enhanced sources for the elderly, that sort of thing. An alchemist. Rebecca's expression turned grim. Someone with the knowledge to create a compound like this, and the access to introduce it to specific supplies without detection. Octavian felt cold fury settling over him like armor. Thaddeus Locke had served the northern courts for over a century, had earned trust, respect, responsibility, and he'd used that position to poison them from within. "We need to confront him," Rebecca said, "but carefully. If he realizes we know, he could destroy evidence or accelerate his timeline." Octavian's mind was already working through scenarios, strategies, the chess game of vampire politics that he'd mastered over 3 centuries. "We need proof. Concrete, undeniable proof. Can you synthesize a test that would detect the compound? Given a few hours, yes. Something field applicable that would react visibly to contaminated blood." Rebecca was already sketching formulas. "If we could test his laboratory supplies without him knowing, leave that to me." She looked up sharply. "Your Majesty, if this is a coup attempt, Thaddeus might not be working alone. You could be walking into a trap. Dr. Rivera, I have survived 300 years of vampire politics, 4 assassination attempts, and 2 civil wars. I think I can handle 1 alchemist. Your confidence is either admirable or suicidal. I haven't decided which." Despite the gravity of the situation, Octavian felt his lips curve into something that might have been amusement. "I'm beginning to understand why you chose medicine over diplomacy. Because I'm blunt? Because you're fearless." He held her gaze. "It's a rare quality, even among immortals." Color rose in Rebecca's cheeks the first time he'd seen her blush. She looked away quickly, back to her notes, but not before he caught the pleased surprise in her expression. "I'll have the test ready within 3 hours, she said, her voice carefully professional. "But Your Majesty, when you go to investigate Thaddeus, please be careful." The concern in her voice did something complicated to Octavian's carefully controlled emotions. He reached out, allowing himself the intimacy of touching her shoulder briefly. "I will return safely, Dr. Rivera. You have my word." "Rebecca," she said suddenly, "if we're potentially going into battle together, you should call me Rebecca." Rebecca. Her name felt different in his mouth, more personal than the formal title. "Then you should call me Octavian, at least in private." She nodded, something shifting in the air between them. A boundary crossed, an acknowledgement of the connection neither of them had been willing to name. Octavian left the laboratory with his 2 most trusted guards, Lyria and Caspian, both centuries old and absolutely loyal. He explained the situation in clipped sentences as they moved through the court's corridors toward the alchemical wing. "Thaddeus," Lyria said, genuine shock in her voice. "Your Majesty, he's served faithfully for over 100 years, which made him the perfect conspirator. Who would suspect someone so seemingly devoted?" Octavian kept his voice low as they approached the alchemical laboratories. "Stay alert. If he's involved in a coup, he may have allies positioned nearby." The laboratories were extensive rooms filled with bubbling retorts, shelves of ingredients both mundane and exotic, the sharp scent of chemicals and magic intermingling. Thaddeus himself was in the main workspace, a thin vampire with white hair pulled into a neat queue, bent over a series of vials. He looked up at their entrance, surprise flickering across his angular features. "Your Majesty, this is unexpected. I'm conducting random inspections of all court facilities," Octavian lied smoothly. "Given the illness affecting our people, I want to ensure every department is maintaining proper protocols." If Thaddeus suspected anything, his expression didn't betray it. "Of course, Your Majesty. I'm happy to show you anything you'd like to see." They moved through the laboratories, Thaddeus explaining various projects with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved his work. Octavian noted details with the precision that had made him an effective ruler: the locked cabinet in the corner, the workbench that had been recently scrubbed clean, the way Thaddeus positioned himself between them and a particular shelf of dark bottles. "What's this?" Octavian asked, gesturing to the shelf. "Experimental preparations," Thaddeus said. "Nothing ready for general use yet." "Show me." For the first time, genuine reluctance crossed the alchemist's face. "Your Majesty, they're quite volatile. I wouldn't want to risk—" "Now, Thaddeus." The command left no room for argument. Thaddeus retrieved one of the dark bottles with hands that trembled slightly. Octavian accepted it, holding the glass up to examine the contents. The liquid inside was thick, almost black, and something about it made his predator instincts scream danger. "What is this?" he asked, keeping his voice casual. "A new blood enhancement formula, designed to increase potency for elderly court members." Thaddeus was sweating now, tiny droplets appearing on his pale forehead. "Still in testing phases." Octavian uncorked the bottle and took a small sample on his fingertip. The liquid felt wrong, too thick, with an acrid scent that natural blood never had. He pretended to examine it closely while actually focusing on Thaddeus's reaction. The alchemist was terrified. "Interesting," Octavian said mildly. "Dr. Rivera will want to analyze this for her research." "That's not necessary." "I insist." Octavian recorked the bottle and handed it to Caspian. "In fact, I'll take samples of all your experimental preparations, to be thorough." Panic flashed across Thaddeus's face, quickly suppressed. "Your Majesty, I really must protest. Some of these formulas are quite sensitive. If they're moved improperly, then you'll come with us to the medical wing to ensure proper handling." Octavian smiled and let the expression show teeth. "I'm sure Dr. Rivera would appreciate your expertise." They left the laboratory with Thaddeus in tow, the alchemist growing increasingly agitated. Octavian sent Lyria ahead to warn Rebecca they were coming, then modulated his pace to keep Thaddeus slightly off balance, fast enough to be uncomfortable, slow enough to allow for conversation. "You've served the northern courts a long time," Octavian said conversationally. 123 years, Your Majesty." "Loyalty is rare among our kind. We're too old, too experienced to give trust easily." Octavian glanced at the alchemist, "Which makes betrayal all the more devastating when it occurs." Thaddeus swallowed audibly. "Indeed, Your Majesty." They arrived at the medical wing to find Rebecca waiting, already set up with her testing equipment. She looked up at their entrance, her gaze moving from Octavian to the bottles Caspian carried to Thaddeus, reading the situation instantly. "Your Majesty," she said formally. "Master Alchemist Locke, thank you for coming." "Dr. Rivera has developed a new diagnostic protocol," Octavian explained. "She'll be testing various blood sources to identify potential contamination vectors." Rebecca picked up the narrative smoothly. "It's a simple chemical test. I'll need just a few drops from each sample." She gestured to her workbench, where a series of clear dishes waited. "Shall we begin?" Octavian watched Thaddeus carefully as Rebecca began her testing. She pipetted small amounts from each bottle into the dishes, then added drops of a reagent she'd prepared. Most remained clear. 2 turned a deep, unmistakable crimson, the color of poisoned blood. "Fascinating," Rebecca said, her voice carrying just the right note of scientific curiosity. "Master Locke, can you explain what would cause this reaction in your experimental preparations?" Thaddeus stared at the crimson dishes, his face frozen in an expression of trapped desperation. Then his hand moved, quick as a striking snake, toward something in his coat pocket. Octavian moved faster. He caught Thaddeus's wrist in an iron grip, twisting until the alchemist cried out and dropped what he'd been reaching for, a small vial of clear liquid that shattered on the stone floor, releasing acrid smoke. "Lyria, Caspian, secure him," Octavian commanded. His guards moved instantly, pinning Thaddeus between them. Octavian picked up one of the shards of the broken vial, carefully examining it. "Acid. You were going to destroy the evidence." "I was trying to protect the court," Thaddeus gasped out, struggling uselessly against the guard's grip. "You don't understand?" "Then explain." Octavian's voice dropped to something dangerous. Explain why you've been poisoning my people. Explain why 7 members of this court are dying from a compound you created. Explain quickly, Thaddeus, because my patience is exhausted. The alchemist's resistance crumbled. It was Lord Draven, he said desperately. He approached me months ago with promises of position, power, wealth, said it was time for new leadership, younger blood. He wanted the oldest court members weakened, vulnerable. I never thought I didn't realize it would kill them. He said it would just make them sick enough to retire, to step down peacefully. Draven. The name settled into place like a missing puzzle piece. Lord Draven was young by vampire standards, barely 2 centuries old, but ambitious and charismatic. He'd been advocating for modernization of court policies, gathering supporters among the younger vampires who felt the ancient traditions were stifling. Octavian had considered him a political nuisance, not a genuine threat. Clearly, that had been a miscalculation. "Where is Draven now?" Octavian asked. "His chambers, I think. Your Majesty, please. I was deceived." "You were complicit." Octavian felt no sympathy. "You poisoned people who trusted you. Whatever Draven promised you, you chose to betray your court." He looked at his guards. "Take him to the holding cells, full security, no visitors except on my direct order." They dragged Thaddeus away, still protesting. Octavian waited until the laboratory door closed before turning to Rebecca. She'd gone very pale, her hands gripping the edge of her workbench. "Are you all right?" he asked. "He was going to throw acid in my laboratory, around my equipment." Her voice shook slightly with reaction. "If you hadn't—" "But I did." Octavian crossed to her, allowing himself to touch her face, tilting her chin up so she met his eyes. "You're safe, Rebecca. I promised to protect you. I keep my promises." She leaned into his touch for just a moment, letting him take some of her weight. "What happens now?" "Now I deal with Lord Draven." Octavian let his hand drop, already shifting into the mindset he needed for what came next. "He's committed treason. By vampire law, the penalty is final death. You're going to execute him." "Yes." Rebecca absorbed that, working through the implications. "Will there be a trial?" "Of sorts. I'll summon the High Council, present the evidence, allow Draven to defend himself. It will be formal, public, and absolute." He studied her carefully. "Does that disturb you?" "I'm a doctor. I save lives. I don't like thinking about ending them." She met his gaze steadily, though. "But I also understand justice, and that sometimes protection requires harsh measures. You're adapting well to vampire politics. I'm not sure that's a compliment." Octavian surprised himself by laughing, a genuine sound of amusement that felt foreign after centuries of measured responses. "With you, Rebecca, it is absolutely a compliment." He sobered, focusing on logistics. "I need to move quickly. Draven may have allies who'll warn him. Stay here with the guards. I'll send additional security to watch the laboratory entrances." "Be careful," Rebecca said again. "If he was ambitious enough to orchestrate a poisoning, he's dangerous." "So am I." Octavian started toward the door, then paused and looked back. "When this is finished, when the court is secure and the crisis is resolved, we need to talk about this, whatever is happening between us." Rebecca's expression softened. "I'd like that." The admission hung in the air between them, acknowledgement of feelings neither had fully voiced. Then Octavian forced himself to turn away, to focus on the immediate threat rather than the woman who'd somehow claimed space in his dead heart. He moved through the court with lethal purpose, gathering his personal guard as he went. The summons went out. Draven was to appear before the throne immediately, by order of the king. The High Council was convened. Within an hour, the throne room was filled with vampires in formal court dress, their white hair and pale skin making them look like marble statues arranged around the obsidian throne. Lord Draven entered with his characteristic swagger, young and handsome and confident. He bowed to Octavian with just the right depth of respect, his expression curious but unconcerned. "Your Majesty, you summoned me urgently?" "Lord Draven." Octavian remained standing, rather than taking his throne, a subtle signal that this was not a normal audience. You are accused of conspiracy, treason, and attempted murder of multiple court members. How do you answer these charges?" The swagger evaporated instantly. Draven's eyes widened, flicking to the assembled council members, reading their serious expressions. "Your Majesty, I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't waste time with denials." Octavian gestured, and Caspian stepped forward with the tested vials from Thaddeus's laboratory. "We have physical evidence of the poison used. We have testimony from your co-conspirator. We have procurement records showing the contaminated blood was distributed to specific court members, all of them ancient, powerful, and politically opposed to your modernization agenda." Draven's face went through several emotions rapidly: fear, calculation, and finally a kind of desperate defiance. "And what if I did?" he said, lifting his chin. "This court is dying, not from poison, but from stagnation. We cling to traditions that made sense 3 centuries ago, but are absurd now. We hide beneath the earth like rats, while the world above us transforms." I offered a path forward. "You offered murder," Octavian interrupted coldly. "Dress it in whatever political ideology you prefer, Draven, but you killed people. People who trusted you, who welcomed you into this court. They would never have stepped aside peacefully. So you decided to force them." Octavian descended from the dais slowly, each step deliberate. The assembled vampires drew back instinctively, giving him space. "You decided your vision was more important than their lives, that your ambition justified assassination." Draven actually looked to the council, as if expecting support. "Some of you agree with me. I know you do. The old ways are failing." "Councillor Marin," Octavian said quietly, "what is the traditional sentence for treason against the throne?" Marin's voice was steady. "Final death, Your Majesty, to be carried out immediately upon conviction. And the vote for conviction requires unanimous agreement from the High Council." Octavian looked at the assembled councillors, 12 vampires representing different factions within the court. "Those in favor of conviction signify now." Every hand rose. Even the younger council members who'd previously supported Draven's political positions voted for his death. Treason apparently transcended factional loyalty. Draven saw his fate in those raised hands. His defiance crumbled. "Please," he said, and his voice broke. "Your Majesty, I was trying to help. You were trying to seize power," Octavian said flatly, "and you didn't care who died in the process." He felt no satisfaction in this only cold necessity. "Lord Draven, by unanimous vote of the High Council, you are convicted of treason, sentenced to be carried out immediately." The execution was swift. Octavian did it himself, as was his right and duty as king. One strike, clean and final, and Draven crumbled to ash on the throne room floor. The assembled court watched in absolute silence. "Let this serve as reminder," Octavian said, his voice carrying through the hall. "I welcome debate. I encourage innovation, but I will not tolerate those who seek power through murder." He looked at each council member in turn. "This court is built on laws older than any of us. Those laws exist to protect us from outside threats and from ourselves. Are we understood?" A chorus of affirmation echoed through the throne room. Octavian dismissed the assembly and retreated to his private chambers, feeling suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. Executing a court member, even a traitor, always took its toll. It was necessary, just, but it was also a reminder of the violence that lay at the heart of vampire society. He found himself thinking of Rebecca, of her dedication to saving lives, her fierce intelligence, her stubborn refusal to rest when people needed her help. She represented something he'd nearly forgotten: existed genuine goodness, uncomplicated by the political calculations that defined vampire existence. A knock at his door interrupted the thought. "Enter," he called. Rebecca stepped inside, flanked by 2 guards who'd clearly escorted her from the medical wing. She looked around his chambers with obvious curiosity, taking in the mixture of antique furniture and modern technology. The books lining the walls, the floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the underground court's illuminated gardens. "Is it done?" she asked quietly. "It's done." She crossed the room to stand before him, studying his face with a physician's careful attention. How do you feel? You realize you're asking a vampire king about his emotions? I'm asking Octavian about his emotions, she corrected. There's a difference. And there was. With her, he'd been honest in ways he hadn't allowed himself with anyone in decades. She'd earned that truth, somehow, in the handful of days since she'd arrived at his court. Tired, he admitted. Justice is necessary, but it's rarely satisfying. Draven was young and foolish and ambitious, and now he's dust on my throne room floor. He met her gaze. I don't regret the execution. He would have killed more people, but I regret that it was necessary. Rebecca nodded slowly. That's what separates you from him, I think. He was willing to kill without regret. You kill when you must, but you still feel the weight of it. Is that supposed to be comforting? It's supposed to be honest. She hesitated, then reached out and took his hand, the same hand that had carried out the execution hours before. Her skin was warm against his cold flesh. You're not a monster, Octavian. No matter what you have to do to protect your people. The simple acceptance in her voice undid something in his carefully maintained composure. Octavian pulled her closer, not quite an embrace, but near enough that he could feel her warmth, smell the human scent of her that was becoming achingly familiar. You shouldn't be here, he said, though he made no move to release her. It's not proper. A human alone with the king in his private chambers. Are you going to hurt me? Never. Then I think I'm exactly where I should be. Rebecca looked up at him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. Unless you want me to leave? No. The word came out more forcefully than intended. Stay, please. They stood like that for a long moment, neither quite ready to name what was building between them. Then Rebecca stepped back slightly, maintaining contact through their joined hands. I've started treatment on Lord Ambrose and the others, she said. The transfusion protocols are working. The compound is flushing out of their systems faster than I'd hoped. They should all make full recoveries within a week. Relief flooded through Octavian. That's excellent news. It is, which means my work here is essentially done. She watched his face carefully. The crisis is solved. Your court is safe. You don't really need a human physician anymore. The thought of her leaving hit Octavian like physical blow. He'd been so focused on the immediate threats, the poisoning, Draven, protecting Rebecca from conspirators, that he hadn't considered what would happen after. She had a life above ground, a career, probably friends and family, an entire existence that had nothing to do with vampire courts and underground politics. You want to leave? He asked carefully. I didn't say that. Rebecca's grip tightened on his hand. I'm saying that my original purpose here is fulfilled. If I stay, it would be for different reasons. What reasons? Don't make me say it first, she said with a slight laugh. You're 300 years old. Surely you have more experience with this sort of thing. Octavian found himself genuinely uncertain, a state he hadn't experienced in decades. Everything about Rebecca defied his expectations, her courage, her competence, the way she made him feel strangely human despite centuries of immortality. He wanted her to stay, wanted it with an intensity that alarmed him, but wanting wasn't enough. She deserved honesty about what staying would mean. If you remain at this court, he said slowly, there will be complications, political ones. The vampires here are already gossiping about my attention to you. Some see you as a dangerous distraction, others see you as potential leverage. You would be constantly navigating dangers you weren't trained for. I survived a poisoning conspiracy and helped catch a traitor. I think I can handle court gossip. It's more than gossip. This is vampire society, Rebecca. We're territorial, possessive, and we hold grudges for centuries. Anyone I show favor to becomes a target for those who want to undermine me. So you do show me favor? She was almost teasing now, trying to lighten the intensity. You know I do. Octavian let frustration seep into his voice. I canceled tribunals to sit vigil while you slept. I executed a lord who would have harmed you. I feel your presence like heat against my skin whenever you're near. Of course I show you favor. Rebecca went very still. Octavian, you asked for honesty. He met her eyes directly. Here it is. I am 3 centuries old, and I have never felt for anyone what I feel for you. You're human, fragile, temporary, utterly unsuited to this world, and I want you anyway. I want you to stay. I want to hear you argue about medical protocols and watch you work yourself into exhaustion for people who aren't even your species. I want... She kissed him. It was unpracticed and sudden and perfect. Rebecca rose on her toes to press her lips to his, one hand coming up to cup his jaw. Octavian froze for half a heartbeat in shock, then pulled her fully against him, returning the kiss with 300 years of controlled passion, finally given permission to escape. She tasted like coffee and determination, and something uniquely herself. Her warmth flooded through him, chasing away the cold that had defined his existence for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Octavian found himself genuinely shaken. I want to stay, Rebecca said against his mouth. Not as your court physician, not as a political arrangement. I want to stay because somewhere between you ordering me to eat soup and executing a traitor to protect your people, I fell in love with you. Rebecca, I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. I know there are about 1,000 practical problems we'll have to figure out. She looked up at him with those bright hazel eyes. But I'm choosing this. Choosing you. If you'll have me. Octavian felt something in his chest, his dead, still heart stir with emotion he'd thought long extinct. I told you I protect what's mine, he said quietly. If you stay, you become mine, Rebecca. Fully. I will shelter you, defend you, give you everything I possess. But I will also be possessive and demanding and probably insufferable. Vampire kings don't do anything by half measures. Good. She smiled up at him. Because neither do I. They kissed again, slower this time, learning each other. Octavian marveled at the warmth of her, the living vitality that seemed to pour from her skin. He'd forgotten what it felt like to touch something warm and breathing, had forgotten the simple pleasure of human contact. When they finally separated, Rebecca laughed breathlessly. So, what happens now? Now, Octavian said, we navigate the complicated intersection of vampire politics and human stubbornness. He paused, considering. And you should probably know that traditionally, if a vampire king takes a consort, it's permanent. We don't do temporary relationships. Permanent meaning? Meaning eventually, if this continues, I would offer you the choice to turn, to become vampire, to share immortality with me. He watched her face carefully. But that's not a decision to make lightly, and certainly not immediately. You would need time to consider. I want it, Rebecca interrupted. Octavian blinked. You haven't heard the full implications. I'm a physician, Octavian. I understand exactly what turning entails. The physiological changes, the need for blood, the sensitivity to sunlight. She gripped his arms. I also understand that I just found someone I love, and I'm not interested in being temporary. If staying with you means becoming vampire, then that's what I'll do. It's not reversible. I know. You'll lose the warmth, the humanity, the ability to walk in daylight. I'll gain eternity with you. Seems like a fair trade. Octavian stared at her, torn between concern and fierce joy. You're certain? Completely. Rebecca's expression was serious now. I've spent my entire medical career trying to extend human life, fighting death by inches. This is choosing to beat death entirely. And it means I can be the court physician not just for a few decades, but for centuries. I can really help your people long term. Of course, she'd frame it partly as medical opportunity. That was so fundamentally Rebecca that Octavian found himself laughing. What? She asked. You. Deciding to become an immortal vampire partly because it makes you a more effective physician. Well, that's not the only reason, she protested. There's also the incredibly attractive vampire king who I happen to be in love with. Incredibly attractive? Don't let it go to your head. But she was blushing again, color rising in her cheeks in a way that would disappear once she turned. Octavian cupped her face gently, memorizing the details. The turning process takes 3 days. It's painful, I won't lie about that. And there's a recovery period where you'll be weak, learning to control new instincts and abilities. He held her gaze. I'll be with you through all of it, every moment. When? Rebecca asked simply. Not immediately. You should inform your family that you're extending your stay. Make arrangements for your human life. He hesitated. Are you close with your family? A shadow crossed Rebecca's face. My parents died when I was 20. Car accident. I have some extended family, but we're not particularly close. My medical practice is solo, and I've already told my assistant I'd be gone for an extended period. She met his eyes. I don't have much tying me to the surface world, Octavian, which maybe sounds sad, but it's true. Then you'll build a new life here, with me. The words felt like a vow. They spent the rest of the night talking about logistics and practicalities and the 1,000 small details of combining human existence with vampire immortality. Rebecca had questions about vampire physiology that Octavian answered with clinical precision. He had questions about her life before, which she answered with the same honesty he'd shown her. Dawn approached artificial dawn in the underground court, signaled by the dimming of the magical lights that simulated daylight hours. Rebecca finally admitted exhaustion, and Octavian showed her to guest chambers that adjoined his own. Sleep, he commanded gently. Real sleep, not the half-rest you've been surviving on. Bossy, she murmured, but she was already heading for the bed. Octavian watched her settle into the luxurious sheets, her auburn hair spreading across the pillow. Something in his chest tightened at the sight, possessiveness mixed with protectiveness, mixed with emotions he didn't have names for. Octavian, Rebecca's voice was sleepy. Thank you for protecting me, for being honest, for everything. Thank you, he replied quietly, for saving my people, for seeing past the monster to the man, for choosing to stay. She smiled at him with drowsy contentment. Then sleep claimed her. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Rebecca completed treatment protocols for all the poisoning victims, every one of them making full recoveries. She spent hours in the medical library, reading ancient texts about vampire physiology in preparation for her turning. Octavian handled the political aftermath of Draven's execution, solidifying alliances and making it clear that his rule was absolute. And in the quiet moments, the late evenings when court business finally settled, they found each other, talked for hours about everything and nothing, learned each other's preferences and quirks and habits. Octavian discovered that Rebecca sang absently while working, that she had a weakness for sweet foods, that she laughed with her whole body when genuinely amused. Rebecca learned that Octavian had been a scholar before becoming king, that he played piano beautifully, that he had a dry sense of humor hidden beneath layers of royal dignity. A week after the crisis resolved, they stood in Octavian's private chambers at what would have been midnight in the world above. Rebecca was dressed in a simple white gown, and she'd asked for her hair to be unbound. She looked beautiful and terrified and determined all at once. Last chance to change your mind, Octavian said, though the words physically hurt to speak. Not changing my mind. Rebecca took his hands. I'm ready. The turning ritual was ancient, formal, witnessed by Councillor Marin and 2 other high-ranking court members to make it official. Octavian spoke the traditional words in a language older than English, then drew Rebecca close. It will hurt, he warned one final time. I trust you, she whispered back. He bit her throat with vampiric precision, not the violent attack of feeding, but the controlled exchange of the turning bite. Her blood flowed over his tongue, bright with life and warmth, and he had to control the instinct to drink deeply. Instead, he took only what was necessary, then bit his own wrist and pressed it to her lips. Drink, he commanded softly. Rebecca hesitated only a moment before obeying. She drank his blood, ancient and cold and filled with power, and Octavian felt the moment the transformation began. Her body seized, the pain starting as his blood rewrote her entire physiology at the cellular level. He lifted her and carried her to his bed, staying close as the turning took hold. True to his word, he remained at her side through everything, the fever that burned through her, The convulsions as her body died and reformed, the moments of lucidity where she gripped his hand and begged him not to leave. "Never," he told her, over and over. "I'm here. I'm staying. You're safe." 3 days passed in agony and transformation. Octavian barely left her side, managing court business from his chambers so he could monitor her constantly. The moments when she was coherent, he talked to her about the court, about their future, about anything to give her something to focus on beyond the pain. On the 3rd night, the transformation completed. Rebecca's eyes opened, and they were no longer hazel, but a pale, luminous gold vampire eyes. Her skin had taken on the characteristic alabaster tone, and when she breathed it was from habit rather than necessity. She sat up slowly, looking at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I can hear your heartbeat," she whispered. Or no, not a heartbeat, but something, a presence, like sensing heat without touching. "That's the blood bond," Octavian explained, relief flooding through him at seeing her coherent. "You can sense me now, always. Distance doesn't matter." Rebecca looked at him, and her new vampire senses must have shown her things she couldn't see before. "You were terrified," she said wonderingly. "The whole time. You were terrified something would go wrong. Turnings fail sometimes, especially for older humans." He touched her face carefully. "I couldn't lose you. Not after finding you." She kissed him then, and it was different, cooler now, vampire to vampire, but no less intense. When they broke apart, Rebecca laughed breathlessly. "This is going to take getting used to. You have eternity to adjust." Octavian helped her stand, steadying her when her new strength made her movements clumsy. "How do you feel?" "Powerful, clear, like someone turned up the resolution on reality." She looked around his chambers, seeing details she'd missed before. "And hungry. Is that normal?" "Completely normal. Come." He led her to the private dining room where servants had prepared fresh blood-clean sources, carefully tested after the poisoning crisis. Rebecca approached the crystal glass with obvious trepidation. "It's all right," Octavian assured her. "This is what you are now. No shame in it." She drank carefully at first, then with growing confidence as instinct took over. When she finished, she looked at the empty glass with complicated emotions crossing her face. "I'm really vampire now," she said. "It's one thing to decide intellectually, but actually drinking blood. Regrets? No." She met his eyes with new golden gaze. "Just processing. I'm not human anymore. That's significant." "You're still you," Octavian said firmly. "The turning changes physiology, not personality. You're still brilliant and stubborn and dedicated. Now you simply have the time and strength to fully embrace those qualities." Over the following weeks, Rebecca learned to navigate her new existence. Octavian taught her to control vampire strength, to move with supernatural speed, to use the enhanced senses that now defined her perception. She was a quick study, approaching vampirism with the same methodical competence she'd shown in medicine. The court had mixed reactions to their king's new consort. Some welcomed Rebecca, recognizing her intelligence and the fact that she'd saved multiple court members. Others viewed her with suspicion, a former human elevated too quickly, given too much influence. But Octavian's absolute support made open opposition impossible. 2 months after her turning, Octavian made it official. He summoned the full court to the throne room for a formal ceremony. Rebecca wore a gown of deep crimson, her new white hair the mark of mature vampires, styled elaborately. She looked regal and confident and perfect. Octavian took her hand before the assembled court. "Rebecca Rivera," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "You came to us as a healer and proved yourself as a protector of this court. You showed courage, wisdom, and dedication beyond what duty required. Now I ask you, before these witnesses, to accept a greater role." He produced a circlet of dark metal inlaid with blood-red stones, the crown of the vampire queen, unworn for over a century. "Will you stand as my equal, rule beside me, share both power and burden as queen of the northern courts?" Rebecca's eyes widened. They discussed this privately, but the public declaration still clearly moved her. "I will," she said clearly. I accept. Octavian placed the circlet on her head, then turned to face the court. I present Rebecca Theron, Queen of the Northern Courts. She carries my authority and my protection. Any who challenge her, challenge me. Any who honor her, honor me. This is my decree. The court knelt as one, even those who'd opposed Rebecca's elevation. The gesture was grudging from some, enthusiastic from others, but universal. Octavian had made his choice, and his will was law. That night, after the ceremony and the formal reception, they retreated to their private chambers. Rebecca removed the heavy crown with obvious relief, setting it carefully on its stand. That was intense, she said. Regrets? Octavian asked, echoing their earlier conversation. Not even slightly. She crossed to him, taking his hands. Though I have to ask, are you sure about this? Making me queen? I've been vampire for 2 months. Some of those courtiers have been alive for centuries. Which is exactly why I chose you. Octavian pulled her close. You bring fresh perspective. You question old assumptions. You see problems differently than those trapped by centuries of tradition. He kissed her forehead gently. And you're mine. My partner, my equal, my queen. That's all the qualification needed. Rebecca leaned against him, and they stood together in comfortable silence. Through the windows, the underground court's garden was visible, carefully cultivated spaces that mimicked surface nature, lit by magical approximations of moonlight. I miss sunlight sometimes, Rebecca admitted quietly. I knew I would, but actually experiencing it, it's harder than I expected. I know. Octavian had centuries of practice with that particular loss. It never fully goes away, the memory of warmth on your skin, but you learn to find beauty in what we have instead. Teach me, she said simply. So he did. Over the following months and years, Octavian taught Rebecca to appreciate the unique aesthetics of vampire existence, the way shadows moved in torchlight, the subtle beauty of stone and earth and carefully cultivated darkness. The pleasure of existing outside normal human time, moving through decades with the patience immortality provided. Rebecca threw herself into her role as queen with characteristic intensity. She modernized the court's medical facilities, establishing protocols for treating vampire ailments that combined ancient knowledge with modern techniques. She mediated disputes between different factions, bringing a human understanding of empathy to vampire politics. She even started teaching, offering lectures on medicine and physiology that younger vampires attended eagerly. And through it all, her relationship with Octavian deepened into something that transcended their individual selves. They became a unit, the king and queen, who complemented each other perfectly. Where he was cold calculation, she was warm empathy. Where she was impulsive action, he was strategic patience. Together, they ruled the northern courts with a balance that strengthened the entire realm. 5 years after her turning a blink of time in vampire terms, Rebecca stood in the medical wing treating a young vampire who'd injured himself in training. She'd just finished bandaging the wound when Octavian appeared in the doorway. Your Majesty, she said formally, aware of the patient watching. To what do I owe the honor? I wanted to see my queen, Octavian replied, his eyes warm despite the formal tone. And to remind her that she promised to join me for the solstice celebration tonight. Rebecca finished with her patient, sent him off with instructions for wound care, then crossed to Octavian. Was I in danger of forgetting? You were in danger of working through the celebration entirely, he said. As you do. I resent the accurate observation. But she was removing her medical coat, gesturing to the assistant healers that they should handle any additional patients. They walked together through the corridors, acknowledged by passing courtiers with bows and murmurs of respect. Rebecca no longer felt awkward in her role. 5 years had given her confidence, had transformed the former human physician into a vampire queen who commanded rooms with natural authority. Do you remember, Octavian said quietly, the night you fainted on the throne room floor? Hard to forget, the most embarrassing moment of my life. I knew then, he continued, seeing you collapsed, understanding you'd worked yourself to collapse, trying to help people you just met. I knew you were extraordinary. Rebecca stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "You never told me that. I'm telling you now." He cupped her face with the gentleness that still surprised her sometimes, coming from a 300-year-old vampire king. "You were extraordinary then, and you're extraordinary now. My queen, my partner, my love. Octavian." She rose on her toes, still needed to do that even with vampire grace, and kissed him. The bond between them hummed, a connection deeper than blood or vows, something that transcended even vampire immortality. When they separated, Rebecca smiled up at him. "You know what's funny? If you'd asked me 6 years ago where I'd be now, vampire queen ruling an underground court would not have made the list." "Regrets?" he asked for the third time in their relationship, and for the third time she answered the same way. "Not even one." She took his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I chose this. Chose you. Best decision I ever made." They continued to the solstice celebration together, entering the great hall where the court had gathered. Music played ancient instruments, producing haunting melodies. Vampires danced with supernatural grace, their white hair and pale skin creating a sea of elegant movement. Octavian led Rebecca to the center of the hall, and they danced together as the court watched. She'd learned vampire dancing over the years, movements that were faster and more complex than human styles, requiring supernatural reflexes to execute properly. They moved together perfectly, partners in every sense, and Rebecca felt the eyes of the court on them. Let them watch. Let them see that their king had chosen well, that his human physician had become a worthy queen. Let them see what love looked like when given immortal time to grow and deepen and transform into something unbreakable. The dance ended to polite applause. Octavian kept Rebecca close, his arm around her waist, and addressed the assembled court. "5 years ago, this court faced a crisis that threatened our very existence," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "We were being poisoned from within, dying slowly, and none of our own could identify the cause. So I brought in an outsider, a human physician who collapsed from exhaustion trying to save us." He looked at Rebecca with obvious affection. She solved the mystery, identified the poison, helped unmask the conspirators, and then, when offered the choice, she chose to stay, chose to become one of us, chose to stand beside me as queen. Rebecca felt her throat tighten with emotion. Vampires could still cry, she'd learned, though the tears were tinged pink with blood. "Tonight on the solstice, I want to honor that choice," Octavian continued. "Queen Rebecca has transformed this court's medical practices, saved countless lives, and ruled with wisdom beyond her years. She proves every day that the best decisions are often the unexpected ones." He raised his glass. "To the queen who fainted on the throne room floor and woke to become our salvation. To Rebecca." "To Rebecca," the court echoed, raising their own glasses. Rebecca blinked back blood tears, overwhelmed by the acceptance. 5 years ago, these same vampires had viewed her with suspicion and doubt. Now they honored her as their queen, recognized her contributions, accepted her as one of their own. She raised her own glass in acknowledgement, then turned to Octavian. "Thank you," she said quietly, for his ears alone. "I love you," he replied simply. "Today, tomorrow, and for whatever eternities we're granted. You're mine, Rebecca. Always." "Always," she agreed. They stayed at the celebration for hours, fulfilling their social obligations as king and queen. But eventually, they slipped away, retreating to their private chambers where they could simply be Octavian and Rebecca, vampire and former human, king and queen who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. Rebecca stood by the windows, looking out at the underground gardens. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 years ago, dedicated physician, slightly lonely, convinced her work was the most important thing in her life. She thought about how that woman would react to learning she'd become a vampire, a queen, eternally bonded to a centuries-old king. "What are you thinking?" Octavian asked, joining her at the window. "That I miss sunlight," Rebecca said honestly. "That I miss some parts of being human. That this life isn't always easy or comfortable." She turned to face him. "And that I wouldn't trade it for anything. This is where I belong, With you, with this court, this is home." Octavian pulled her close, and she felt the bond between them, that supernatural connection that let them sense each other's emotions, share each other's strength. Through the bond, she felt his love, his pride, his absolute certainty that she was exactly where she should be. "Home," he agreed quietly. Years continued to pass, decades, then a century. The underground court evolved, adopting new technologies while maintaining ancient traditions. Rebecca became known throughout vampire society as a brilliant healer and a fair queen, someone who balanced compassion with necessary ruthlessness. She published medical texts that became required reading for vampire physicians across multiple courts. She mediated disputes between rival vampire factions, earning a reputation as an honest broker. And through it all, her relationship with Octavian remained the foundation of everything else. They ruled together, worked together, faced challenges together. The initial passion mellowed into something deeper, not less intense, but more solid, more certain. The kind of love that could survive centuries because it was built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. They had disagreements, of course. Both were strong-willed and opinionated, and vampire stubbornness only intensified those traits. But they'd learned to communicate, to compromise, to choose their battles. And the bond between them meant they could never truly misunderstand each other. Emotions bled through, even when words failed. A century after Rebecca's turning, they stood together in the throne room for the annual court convocation. Representatives from other vampire territories had gathered to discuss matters of mutual concern, territory boundaries, blood supply agreements, how to navigate an increasingly technological human world. Rebecca listened to the debates with the patience she'd cultivated over decades of immortality. Some arguments had been ongoing for centuries before she'd even been born, and would likely continue for centuries after. Vampire society moved slowly, changed reluctantly, clung to traditions with the stubbornness of the truly ancient. But change did happen. Rebecca herself was proof of that, a former human who'd risen to become queen, who'd brought new perspectives and modernized practices that others had adopted. She was living evidence that transformation was possible, that new blood could strengthen rather than weaken vampire society. The convocation concluded with formal agreements and renewed alliances. As the visiting delegations departed, Councillor Marin approached the throne with a pleased expression. "Your Majesties, may I say that was the most productive convocation in 3 decades. Several territories have agreed to adopt your medical protocols, and the boundary dispute with the Eastern courts has been resolved peacefully." "Queen Rebecca deserves the credit," Octavian said. "Her proposal for neutral healing centers accessible to all vampire territories was what broke the deadlock." Rebecca accepted the praise with grace she'd learned over long years. "I simply applied medical logic to political problems. Healing should be above territory disputes." After Marin left, Octavian took Rebecca's hand and led her from the throne room. They walked through the familiar corridors, past the medical wing where Rebecca still treated patients regularly, past the gardens where they'd spent countless evenings talking, all the way to their private chambers. "A century," Octavian said softly. "You've been vampire for a century now." "Has it really been that long?" Rebecca settled into the comfortable chair by the window, still the same spot where she'd stood on her first night as queen. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "That's immortality." Octavian joined her, and they sat together in companionable silence. Rebecca thought about everything that had happened in 100 years. The challenges they'd faced, political crises, external threats, internal disputes. The triumphs they'd celebrated, new alliances formed, medical breakthroughs achieved, the court growing stronger and more prosperous. The quiet moments between, the everyday existence of immortal life that was somehow both mundane and extraordinary. "Do you remember asking me if I had regrets?" she said suddenly. "I remember asking you 3 times. Well, I'm telling you a 4th time, with a century of perspective." Rebecca turned to face him directly. "No regrets, Octavian. Not one. This life we've built together, it's better than anything I imagined possible." Octavian reached out and traced her jaw with one pale finger. "I knew you were extraordinary the moment you collapsed on my throne room floor. Now the entire vampire world knows it too. Because you gave me the opportunity, trusted me, loved me. She caught his hand, pressing it against her cheek. You saw past the terrified human physician to who I could become. I saw who you already were, he corrected gently. The turning just gave you time to fully embrace it. They sat together as the artificial day faded to artificial night, two immortals who'd found each other against impossible odds. The king who'd forbidden anyone to wake his queen when she'd fainted from exhaustion. The physician who'd chosen to become vampire rather than leave the man she loved. Outside their windows, the underground court thrived a hidden society that existed beneath the human world, ancient and modern simultaneously, dangerous and beautiful in equal measure. And at its heart, two rulers who'd learned that sometimes the best partnerships came from the most unexpected places. Rebecca thought about the woman who'd arrived at this court 6 years ago, tired, overworked, driven by medical dedication but lonely in ways she'd barely acknowledged. That woman had fainted on cold stone floors, had pushed herself past human limits, had been surprised by kindness from a vampire king who everyone said was emotionless. Now that woman was queen, had saved countless lives, had found love that would last literally forever, had discovered that home wasn't a place but a person, or in this case, an intimidating, protective, secretly tender vampire king who'd somehow become her entire world. "What are you smiling about?" Octavian asked. "Us," Rebecca said simply. "This improbable, impossible, perfect us." "I forbid you to faint again," he said with mock seriousness. "Once per relationship is quite enough." "I forbid you to be less than honest about caring for me," she countered. "No more pretending it's just pragmatic asset protection." "Deal." He pulled her close, and she settled against him with the ease of long familiarity. "Though I reserve the right to be protective and overbearing. I wouldn't have you any other way." They stayed like that as night deepened, two immortals who'd found in each other something that transcended the boundaries between human and vampire, mortal and eternal, isolation and belonging. The story that had started with a woman fainting from exhaustion and a king who'd forbidden anyone to wake his queen had transformed into an epic of partnership, love, and the kind of devotion that could last literally forever. And in the underground court of the Vampire King, in chambers carved from ancient stone and lit by magical approximation of starlight, a queen who'd once been human leaned against her king and smiled, knowing that this was where she was always meant to be. The future stretched ahead of them, infinite and unknown, full of challenges they'd face together and triumphs they'd share. But that was for tomorrow, and the centuries after. Tonight, there was just this two people who loved each other, who'd built something beautiful from impossible circumstances, who proved that sometimes the best stories start with the most unexpected moments. Sometimes they start with exhaustion and collapse and a command that no one disturb the sleeping healer. Sometimes they start with a forbidden awakening that leads to everything else. Sometimes they start exactly the way they're supposed to, even when no one could have predicted it. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they never really end at all.